The vibration came first, always before the pain. Ilara pressed her palms flat against the frozen flagstone floor of the packhouse kitchen, feeling the thrum of 50 wolves gathering in the great hall above her. The stone carried their footsteps like a second heartbeat, each one landing against her fingertips, in a language she had taught herself to read since childhood. Heavy boot, light shuffle. That was Gregor the head baiter, dragging his left leg from the old war wound. Quick tap, 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 pups running. Then a vibration so deep it rattled the copper pots hanging above the washing basin, shook loose a flake of dried rosemary from the herb rack, and travelled up through Ilara's kneecaps where they pressed against the cold stone. She did not know what that one was. The water in the sink rippled. Not from a draught, not from the ancient pipes that groaned through the pack-house walls like arthritic fingers. Something had entered the building that made the entire foundation hum, and Ilara lifted her wet hands from the pile of dishes and pressed them to the floor again, reading the vibrations the way a blind person reads Braille. She had been deaf since birth. Not the partial kind, not the kind where hearing aids could coax the world into a muffled approximation of sound. Total, cellular, absolute silence. The pack healers had examined her at 3 days old, declared her wolf dormant, her hearing nerve dead, and her value to the Silver Ridge pack approximately 0. 22 years later, she was still washing their dishes. The bruise on her left forearm throbbed. Maren the baiter's daughter had grabbed her there yesterday when Ilara had accidentally splashed soapy water on her new leather boots. Maren's fingers had dug in with the casual precision of someone who had mapped out exactly which parts of Ilara's body were already bruised and which were fresh territory. The mark was shaped like 4 fingertips purple, going yellow at the edges, and Ilara had covered it with a long-sleeved shirt that smelled of lye and old grease, because it was the only clean one left in the servants' quarters. She had 2 shirts. The other one had a blood stain on the collar from when her nose had bled last week, spontaneously the way noses bled when you had not eaten enough iron for months. The pack nutritionist, such as she, was allocated omega rations based on utility. Ilara's utility score had been the lowest in the pack for 6 consecutive years. She ate what was left, which was usually cold rice, the heels of bread loaves, and whatever vegetables had gone soft enough that the ranked wolves refused them. Her stomach contracted now a sharp cramp beneath her ribs, and she pressed her hip against the edge of the stone sink to ride it out. The dinner preparations were laid across the counter behind her. 40 pounds of venison, root vegetables roasted in rosemary oil, fresh bread that smelled of warm yeast and honey, and the scent alone was a kind of cruelty, because she would not taste any of it. She would wash the plates it was served on, scrub the grease from the roasting pans, and eat her cold rice in the basement room she shared with 2 other Omega servants, both of whom had learned not to talk to her because she could not hear them, and because being seen with Ilara was a social liability that even Omegas could not afford. The floor vibrated again, that same deep, bone-rattling frequency. Ilara frowned and pressed both palms down harder. In 22 years of reading the pack-house through its stones, she had catalogued every vibration. She knew the difference between a door slamming and a fist hitting a table. She knew when the alpha was angry because his footsteps doubled in weight. She knew when the wolves were shifting because the floor carried a particular tremor, a subsonic shudder that was less sound than seismic event. This was none of those things. This was something calling. She pulled her hands back as if the stone had burned her, dried them on her apron, returned to the dishes, scrubbing a cast-iron pan with steel wool until her knuckles ached because the alternative was acknowledging what she had felt, and acknowledging it meant acknowledging that her body had responded. Her chest had tightened, her pulse had climbed, and something behind her sternum, something dormant and dusty and locked away in a room she had never been able to open, had stirred. It was nothing. A truck passing on the mountain road, construction equipment, an earthquake tremor. Anything but what her instincts, those useless, vestigial instincts of a wolf that had never woken, were trying to tell her. The kitchen door swung open. She felt the draft before she saw the movement, and she turned to find Maren standing in the doorway, with her arms crossed and her lips moving. Elara watched Maren's mouth reading the shapes of words she had been reading since she learned that speech existed. "Get upstairs. Now, the Alpha King is here, and you need to serve drinks." Elara blinked. She shaped the words back carefully, her voice odd and flat, in a way she could feel in her throat, but never hear. She had been told it sounded like someone speaking underwater. "I am not cleared for hall service. Gregor said, kitchen only." Maren's eyes narrowed. Her lips moved again, faster now, annoyed. "Gregor is busy. 2 servers called in sick. You are the only one left, and if you embarrass this pack in front of the Alpha King of the Blackmore territory, I will personally make sure you do not eat for a week." "Do you understand me?" Elara understood. She always understood. That was the cruel irony of her condition. She could not hear a single word anyone said, but she understood everything. She understood Maren's contempt. She understood the pack's indifference. She understood that the Alpha King of Blackmore was the most powerful wolf on the continent, that his territory spanned from the northern mountains to the eastern sea, and that his arrival at Silver Ridge was the kind of event that made even ranked wolves nervous. She dried her hands, pulled off her grease-stained apron, looked down at her clothes, the lye-smelling shirt, the faded black pants with the fraying hem, the shoes that had a crack across the left sole that let in water when the ground was wet. Maren looked her up and down, and for a moment something crossed her face that was not cruelty. It was closer to discomfort. She reached behind the door and pulled out a folded black shirt, tossing it at Elara. It was clean. It smelled of cedar and dryer sheets. "Change. Brush your hair. You have 2 minutes." Then she was gone, and the draft from the door settled, and Elara was alone with the clean shirt pressed against her chest, and the floor still vibrating with that deep, unknowable frequency. She changed in the supply closet between the mop bucket and a shelf of industrial bleach. The new shirt was too big, clearly borrowed from someone ranked, and it hung past her wrists. She rolled the sleeves, twice splashed water on her face from the utility sink, and dragged her fingers through her hair. It was dark, nearly black, and it hung past her shoulders in a way that was less style than neglect. She had not cut it in a year, because scissors were a privilege that required a request form and an Omega supervisor's signature, and the Omega supervisor was Gregor's mate, who had once told Elara that signing forms for a deaf wolf was a waste of ink. She caught her reflection in the small spotted mirror above the sink. Thin face, shadows under her eyes like thumbprints. A scar along her jawline from when she was 14, and a ranked wolf's child had thrown a ceramic plate at her head for bringing the wrong juice. Her eyes were the only feature that did not look exhausted. They were pale grey, almost silver in certain light, and they had a quality that made people uncomfortable, though no one had ever explained why. She looked away from the mirror and walked upstairs. The great hall of the Silver Ridge pack house was a cavernous room, with timber beams and a stone fireplace large enough to stand in. Elara had been in it perhaps a dozen times, always to clean. Now it was full of wolves. She felt them before she saw them, the vibration of 50 bodies in motion, the subsonic hum of dominant wolves asserting presence, the particular tremor of fear that ran through a pack when something more powerful than their alpha had entered their space. She picked up the tray of drinks from the serving station near the kitchen entrance. Crystal glasses filled with amber whiskey arranged in neat rows. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. When you could not hear the world crashing around you, your body learned a different kind of calm. She moved through the crowd, with her eyes down the way Omegas were trained to move. Peripheral vision and floor vibrations told her where to step, when to pause, when someone was reaching for a glass. She had done this at smaller events, private dinners, where the ranked wolves wanted to show off their obedient staff. The trick was to be invisible. The trick was to be furniture. She was halfway across the hall when the floor changed. It was not a vibration. It was a pulse. A single massive wave of pressure that rolled through the stone beneath her feet and traveled up through her legs, her spine, her ribs, and detonated behind her sternum like a second heartbeat slamming to life. The tray in her hands rattled. The whiskey trembled in the glasses. Every wolf in the room had gone still. She could feel the sudden absence of movement, the way you feel a room hold its breath, even when you cannot hear the silence. She looked up. He was standing at the far end of the hall near the fireplace, and the first thing she registered was size. Not just tall, not just broad. The Alpha King of Blackmore filled the space he occupied, the way a thunderstorm fills a valley. He was dressed simply. Black shirt sleeves pushed to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with pale scars that caught the firelight. His hair was dark, cut short at the sides, longer on top, and it fell across his forehead in a way that should have been casual, but was not, because nothing about him was casual. His jaw was set hard. His hands, hanging at his sides, were the hands of someone who had broken things with them and would do so again without hesitation. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Golden. Not brown gold or hazel gold. True gold, the color of late afternoon sun through honey, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that made the air between them feel solid, feel like something she could reach out and touch. Every other wolf in the room had their eyes on him. He had his on her. Only her. And the pulse in the stone floor, the one that had traveled up through her bones, was coming from him. She understood that now with a certainty that bypassed logic. He was the vibration. He had been the vibration all along since she had first felt it in the kitchen, with her palms pressed to the flagstones. The tray slipped. Not completely. She caught it muscle memory, saving her fingers, clamping down on the edges. One glass tipped and spilled whiskey across the silver surface, and the liquid ran to the edge and dripped onto the stone floor, and the sound it made was nothing to her, but every wolf in the room turned to look at the deaf Omega, who had just spilled a drink in front of the Alpha King. She could read their faces. Anger from the Silver Ridge Alpha, a stocky man named Aldrich, who valued appearances the way a drowning man values air. Embarrassment from his Luna, a thin woman with perfect posture and a smile that never reached her eyes. Amusement from some of the Blackmore warriors, their mouths curling in the way that meant this is going to be entertaining. But the Alpha King, he was not angry. He was not amused. He was moving, crossing the hall with strides that ate the distance between them, and the wolves parted for him, the way water parts for a blade, and the floor was shaking with every step he took, not from weight, but from power, from the kind of authority that made the stone itself respond. Elara stood frozen, the tray in her hands, the spilled whiskey dripping, her heart doing something it had never done before, hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth, in her fingertips, in the soles of her feet, where they pressed against the vibrating stone. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell him. Pine resin, wood smoke, something metallic underneath like the air before lightning. And beneath all of that, something warm and deep and specific like cinnamon bark crushed between fingers like sun-heated leather, and her body responded to it the way a compass responds to north. Without thought, without permission. Something inside her chest pulled toward him so hard she swayed on her feet. He was looking at her face, not at the tray, not at the spill, not at her shabby shoes or her too big borrowed shirt. At her face, and his expression was not one she had ever seen before. It was the expression of a man who had just found something he had been looking for so long he had forgotten he was looking. His lips moved. She watched them carefully the way she watched all lips mapping the shapes of words she would never hear. Mate. One word. His mouth formed it with a kind of reverence that did not match his face, his scars, his size. And then his lips moved again, and this time the words were longer, and she was reading them, but also reading his eyes, his jaw, the way his hands had curled into fists at his sides, not from anger, but from restraint. Who did this to you? It was not a question. It was a statement. And his eyes were on the bruise on her forearm, the one Maren had left, which had become visible because the too big shirt had slipped down when she caught the tray. Elara realized she was trembling, not from cold, not from fear exactly, from something she did not have a word for because she had never felt it before. She opened her mouth to respond, to shape words with her throat, the way she had taught herself. But nothing came. For the first time in her life, her lips could not find the form of what she needed to say. The tray was taken from her hands, not by a servant, by him. The Alpha King of Blackmore took a serving tray from a deaf Omega's shaking hands and set it on the nearest table without looking away from her face. And then his hand was at her wrist, not grabbing, not restraining. His fingers encircled the bruise with a touch so careful it was barely contact, his thumb hovering over the purple marks, as if he could read the story of them through skin. She felt his hand. That was all. The warmth of his palm, the calluses on his fingers, the barely perceptible tremor in his own grip, as if he was fighting something enormous inside himself. And the pulse, the one she had felt through the floor, was now traveling directly from his skin into hers, up her arm, into her chest, and the locked room behind her sternum cracked open half an inch and light poured in. The Silver Ridge Alpha was moving toward them. She could feel his approach in the floor, the heavy, nervous footsteps of a man whose territory was being claimed in front of his eyes. His mouth was moving, forming words directed at the Alpha King, and Elara read them over the king's shoulder. "Your Majesty, I apologize for this Omega's clumsiness. She is deaf and simple. She should never have been assigned to hall service. I will have her punished immediately." The Alpha King did not turn around. His eyes stayed on Elara, and something in them changed. The gold darkened. Not to brown, to something deeper, something that was less color than temperature, like watching a forge go from warm to white-hot. And the vibration in the floor intensified until the glasses on the tables rattled and the wolves in the room took a collective step backward. He turned then, slowly, and the look he gave Aldrich, the Silver Ridge Alpha, was the look a lion gives a jackal that has wandered too close to its kill. His lips moved, and even from the side Elara could read the words. "If anyone in this pack touches her again, I will dismantle this house stone by stone, and leave nothing standing but the foundation." Aldrich's face went white, not pink, not flushed, white the color of paper, the color of surrender. His mouth opened and closed twice without forming words, which was something Elara had never seen from a man who always had something to say. The Alpha King's hand was still at her wrist, still gentle, still impossibly warm. He looked at her again, and his lips formed a word she had to read twice because she could not believe it. Come. She should not have gone. Every survival instinct she had cultivated in 22 years of Omega life told her to step back, to lower her eyes, to make herself small. Going with the Alpha King of another territory meant leaving her pack, her basement room, her cold rice, the only life she had ever known, miserable as it was. She had no wolf. She had no voice. She had nothing to offer a king except clean dishes and a body that bore bruises like a map of her worthlessness. But the locked room in her chest was open now, and whatever was inside it was not asking for permission. It was pulling, and she went. He walked her out of the great hall with his hand at the small of her back, not pushing, just present a point of warmth between her shoulder blades that she felt through the borrowed shirt. The Blackmore warriors fell into formation around them, without being told, a wall of muscle and leather and controlled violence that parted the Silver Ridge wolves like a plough through soft earth. No one stopped them. No one spoke. Or if they did, Elara could not know, but their faces said everything. Shock. Confusion. And from Maren, standing near the serving station, with her arms crossed and her mouth slightly open, something that looked like fear. Good Elara thought, and was immediately surprised by the thought, because she had never wished fear on anyone. She had barely wished for anything at all. The Alpha King's convoy was parked in the gravel courtyard. 3 black SUVs with tinted windows and engines that idled with a vibration she could feel through the soles of her cracked shoes. He opened the rear door of the middle vehicle himself, not waiting for a driver, and she climbed in because the alternative was climbing back down into the kitchen to finish the dishes. And for the first time in her life, the weight of her own compliance disgusted her. The interior smelled like him, pine and wood smoke and cinnamon bark. The leather seats were warm, heated, and the warmth soaked into her back and her thighs and the aching muscles of her shoulders, and she realized she could not remember the last time she had been warm. Truly warm. Not the stolen warmth of standing near the kitchen ovens or pressing her back against a radiator in the hallway. Real warmth offered freely built into the structure of things. He got in beside her, closed the door. The vibrations of the outside world dampened, and she was sealed in a space with him, with his scent, and his heat, and the golden eyes that had not stopped watching her since the moment he had first seen her across a crowded hall. His hand went to his pocket. He pulled out a phone, typed something on the screen, turned it toward her. The screen read, "I know you cannot hear me. I do not need you to. Can you read?" She stared at the screen, then at him. She nodded. He typed again, "You are my mate. My wolf recognized you the moment I entered the building. I have been howling for you through the foundation stones for the last hour." Did you feel it? The vibrations, the deep bone-rattling pulse that had shaken the pots in the kitchen and rippled the water in the sink. His howl, not a sound she could hear, but a frequency so low, so powerful, that it traveled through solid stone, through floor joists and foundation walls, through the very bones of the earth, and found her. A deaf wolf, who had never heard anything in her life, had felt the Alpha King's call through the ground beneath her knees. She took the phone from his hands. Their fingers touched, and the shock of it ran through her like ice water and hot tea simultaneously, a sensation that did not make sense, but was more real than anything she had ever felt. She typed slowly, her fingers, unaccustomed to communicating this way with someone who was actually watching, actually waiting. I felt it. I did not know what it was. I thought it was construction equipment. She watched his face as he read it. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, a crack in something granite, something that had not cracked in a very long time. He took the phone back. Construction equipment, he typed. Then my wolf has been called many things. That is a first. She felt something in her chest that she did not recognize at first because it had been so long since it had happened. It was laughter, not the sound of it which she had never known. The physical sensation, the involuntary contraction of her diaphragm, the loosening of her jaw, the way her shoulders dropped a quarter inch. She pressed her hand over her mouth because the sound her laughter made was something she had been mocked for, a breathy, toneless thing that sounded wrong to hearing ears. He reached over and gently pulled her hand away from her mouth. His lips moved. She read them. Do not hide that. The convoy began to move. She felt it in the vibrations of the engine, the shift of gravity, as the vehicle turned onto the mountain road, and she realized she was leaving Silver Ridge. Leaving the only pack she had ever known. Leaving with a man she had met 7 minutes ago, because something in her chest had said, go, and she had gone. She should have been terrified. She was not. 3 days. That was how long it took to reach Blackmore territory, and in those 3 days, Elara learned several things about the Alpha King, whose name she discovered from his phone screen was Kyle Voss. She learned that he slept sitting up, one hand on his thigh, his chin dropping to his chest for 20-minute intervals before snapping back, that he drank his coffee black from a thermos, and that he poured a second cup without being asked, and set it on the console between them, steam curling up in a shape she could watch, but not hear. That his warriors, 6 of them in the other vehicles, communicated with him through a combination of hand signals and brief phone messages that he read with the efficiency of a man who had been commanding people since before he could vote. She learned that he typed the way he moved, directly, without wasted motion. On the first night, they stopped at a safe house, a stone lodge at the edge of a national forest that smelled of cedar shingles and cold chimney ash. He showed her to a room with a bed that had actual sheets, not the thin pilled blanket she had been sleeping under for years, and he stood in the doorway and typed on his phone and showed her the screen. You will eat before you sleep. The kitchen is stocked. Tell me what you want. She typed back. Anything is fine. His jaw tightened. Not at her. At the answer. At what the answer implied about the life she had been living. He typed, That is not what I asked. I asked what you want. She stood in the doorway of a room, with clean sheets, wearing a borrowed shirt, and shoes with cracked soles, and she tried to remember the last time anyone had asked her what she wanted. Not what she needed. Not what she could survive on. What she wanted. She typed eggs, scrambled, with cheese if there is any. He nodded once, turned, walked to the kitchen. 20 minutes later he brought her a plate of scrambled eggs with sharp cheddar melted through them, and toast cut into triangles, and a glass of milk, and a small bowl of strawberries that were slightly too ripe, which meant they were at their sweetest, and she sat on the edge of the clean bed and ate every bite while he leaned against the doorframe and watched and did not type anything and did not need to. She learned one more thing in those 3 days. She learned that the locked room in her chest was not a room. It was a cage, and whatever was inside, it was waking up. It happened on the second night at a different safe house, this one a cabin, at the base of the Blackmore mountain range. She was asleep in her room when the vibrations woke her. Not the gentle hum of a building settling or the distant rumble of trucks on a highway. Something massive and rhythmic and desperate, a pounding that came up through the cabin's wooden floor and into the bed frame and shook her out of sleep like a hand on her shoulder. She pressed her palm to the floor beside the bed, read the vibration, and understood. Kyle was shifting, not voluntarily, not the controlled transformation of an alpha who had mastered his beast. This was a wolf, fighting to get out, thrashing against the confines of a human body, and the vibrations of it were like an earthquake contained in a single room. She could feel the splintering of wood, furniture breaking, the floor flexing under impacts that should have cracked the joists. She stood up, walked to his door, pushed it open. The room was destroyed. The bed frame snapped. The dresser on its side drawers scattered, and Kyle was on his knees in the center of the wreckage, shirtless, his back bowed, his fingers clawed into the wooden floor, and his body was caught between shapes, not fully human, not fully wolf. His spine was ridged with fur that came and went like a tide. His hands were longer, the joints thickened, nails darkened to claws that gouged the pine boards. And his eyes, when he looked up at her, weren't gold. They were black, solid black, the eyes of a beast that had been locked away too long and had forgotten how to be anything but rage. She should have run. Any sane Omega, any sane person, would have turned and fled from an Alpha King mid-shift, mid-loss of control, his wolf ascendant, and his humanity receding. The warriors would have heard. They would have come. They would have handled it with chains and sedatives and the particular grim efficiency of men accustomed to managing a king whose beast was legendary. Elara knelt. She knelt in the doorway in her borrowed shirt and bare feet, and she pressed her palms to the splintered floor, and she did something she had never done before. She pushed back. The vibration left her hands. She felt it go a pulse, traveling outward, through the wood, through the foundation, through the stone and soil beneath. It was the same frequency she had felt when his howl had traveled through the Silver Ridge pack house floor. The same resonance, but reversed. Where his vibration was a storm, hers was the thing that comes after the storm, the settling, the silence, the ground cooling after lightning. His body stilled, not immediately, in stages. The fur receded, the claws shortened, his spine straightened vertebra by vertebra, until he was kneeling upright on the ruined floor with his chest heaving and his eyes shifting from black to gold, to black to gold, and finally settling on gold. He looked at her across the destroyed room. His lips moved. "What are you?" She did not have an answer. She pressed her palms harder against the floor, maintaining the vibration, the counter-frequency, the whatever it was that she had discovered she could do in the same moment she had done it. And the thing in the cage behind her sternum was not just awake now. It was pressing against the bars with the quiet, patient strength of something that had waited 22 years, and could wait 22 more if it had to, but would rather not. He crawled to her, not walked. Crawled on hands and knees across the splintered floor, and she could feel each placement of his palms through the wood, and when he reached her, he sat back on his heels and lifted one hand and pressed it flat against the center of her chest, right over the place where the cage was. And his hand was so large it spanned from collarbone to collarbone, and it was warm and it was shaking. His lips moved again. She read them. Your wolf is not dormant. It is contained. Something is holding it in. She looked at his hand on her chest, felt the warmth of it, felt the vibration traveling between his palm and whatever was behind her ribs. And she thought about the pack healers who had examined her at 3 days old and declared her wolf dead. She thought about Aldrich, who had signed her classification papers. She thought about her mother, whom she had never met, who had died in childbirth, and left behind no documentation except a single item that Elara had kept hidden for 22 years. A necklace. Thin silver chain with a pendant shaped like a crescent moon, small enough to fit in the hollow of her throat. She had found it in a box of her mother's belongings that the pack had been going to throw away. She had worn it every day since she was 6 years old. It sat against her skin, now beneath the borrowed shirt, warm from her body heat, and Kyle's hand was pressed directly over it. His eyes dropped to her collar. His fingers hooked the chain and pulled it free, and the pendant caught the light from the hallway, and his face changed. She watched the change happen. The gold of his eyes widened. His lips parted. His hand, the one holding the chain, went absolutely still, and then his eyes snapped to hers, and his lips formed words she had to read 3 times because they made no sense. This is a binding seal. Old magic. Someone sealed your wolf before you were born. Elara looked at the pendant, the crescent moon she had worn against her throat for 16 years. The only thing she had left of a mother she had never known, and she understood with a clarity that was less revelation than confirmation that she had always known something was wrong. Not wrong with her. Wrong with what had been done to her. She reached up, took the chain between her fingers, and felt for the first time the resistance. The pendant did not want to be removed. It was warm, almost hot, and it clung to her skin the way a living thing clings to its host. But the cage behind her sternum was pressing outward now, and the thing inside it was no longer patient. Kyle's hand closed over hers. His lips moved. Not yet. When you take it off, your wolf will emerge, and if she has been sealed for 22 years, she will be significant. I need to be ready. We need to be at Blackmore, somewhere safe. She nodded, left the pendant where it was. But that night, lying in her clean bed in her borrowed shirt, she pressed her palm to the floor and felt Kyle's heartbeat through the boards. Steady now, calm, and she realized that she had calmed him, that her vibration, whatever it was, had reached his wolf the way his howl had reached her through the stone. They were tuned to the same frequency, 2 instruments playing the same note, one above ground and one below. She fell asleep with her hand on the floor, reading his heartbeat like a lullaby she could not hear, but could feel in every bone of her body. Blackmore was not what she expected. She had expected a fortress, a stone castle, maybe something cold and martial that matched the reputation of the Alpha King, who had conquered 3 rival territories before his 30th birthday and was feared from the northern tundra to the southern coast. Instead, the Blackmore seat was a compound of interconnected buildings made of dark wood and river stone, set into the side of a mountain overlooking a valley so green it hurt to look at. The buildings curved with the terrain following the natural contours of the ridge, and smoke curled from a dozen chimneys, and the scent of pine and cold water and baking bread reached her before the convoy had even stopped. Wolves were everywhere, not in the Silver Ridge sense, where pack members clustered in hierarchical knots and omegas walked the edges of rooms like mice along baseboards. Here the wolves were spread across the compound in a pattern that looked almost casual. A group sparring on a training field, children climbing a wooden play structure, an old woman hanging laundry on a line strung between 2 pines, and she nodded at the convoy as it passed with the unconcerned air of someone who had seen Alpha Kings come and go, and was more interested in whether her sheets would dry before rain. Kyle opened her door before the vehicle had fully stopped. He extended his hand. She took it because taking his hand had become natural in 3 days, which should have frightened her but did not, and he helped her down onto gravel that crunched under her cracked shoes in a way she felt but could not hear. Every wolf in the compound had stopped what they were doing. She could feel their attention, the way she felt vibrations, a pressure change, a shift in the air. They were looking at her, at the thin, scarred, unwashed Omega, standing beside their king in borrowed clothes that did not fit, and she waited for the judgment. She had been judged every day of her life. She knew how to stand inside of it, how to make herself small enough that the contempt slid past. But Kyle's hand tightened on hers. Not painfully, possessively. And he turned to the assembled wolves and his lips moved, and she read them. This is Elara. She is my mate. She is your future queen. Anyone who makes her feel unwelcome will answer to me personally. No one moved. No one looked away. And then the old woman with the laundry walked over, leaving her sheets half hung, and she stood in front of Elara and looked up at her because the woman was barely 5 feet tall, and Elara was 5'7", and her mouth formed words slowly and clearly, the way someone speaks when they know you are reading their lips. Welcome home, child. Are you hungry? Elara burst into tears. She had not cried in years. Not when Maren bruised her. Not when she ate cold rice for the 7th night in a row. Not when the pack healer had told her at 16 that her wolf was confirmed permanently dormant, and she would never shift, never run, never know what it meant to be whole. She had stopped crying at 12 because crying made sound, and the sound she made when she cried was apparently terrible, and the other Omegas had asked her to please stop because it was disturbing. Now she stood in the courtyard of the Blackmore compound in the mountain air that smelled of pine and bread and cold water, and she cried without sound the way she always cried, tears running down her thin face and dripping off her jaw onto the gravel, and Kyle put his arm around her shoulders and pulled her against his chest and let her shake. The old woman whose name was Helga brought her soup. It was the first of many things Helga brought her. Over the next 2 weeks, as Elara settled into Blackmore, like a stray cat discovering warmth, Helga appeared at regular intervals, with food, clean clothes, books, a hairbrush with soft bristles, and once a pair of thick wool socks that she pressed into Elara's hands with a look that said, "I know your feet are cold, I can see it in the way you walk." Helga was not a healer or a servant. She was the pack's lead Omega, a title that did not exist in Silver Ridge, and her job was to manage the welfare of every wolf in Blackmore who was not a warrior or a ranked leader. She had held the position for 37 years. She had outlived 2 Alpha Kings. She typed messages to Elara on a tablet she carried specifically for this purpose, and her messages were the verbal equivalent of a grandmother who loved you enough to be blunt. You need to gain at least 15 pounds. I am not negotiating. Eat the stew. Your shoes are criminal. New ones arrive tomorrow. Yes, I guessed your size. I have been fitting wolves into shoes for 4 decades. The Alpha is outside your door again. He has been there for an hour. He does this every night. You should know. That last message made Elara's chest ache in a way that was becoming familiar. She had been given a room in the main house, a real room with a real door that locked, and windows that faced the valley, and a bed with a mattress that her body sank into, like it was learning the concept of softness for the first time. And every night, according to Helga, Kyle sat on the floor outside her door and stayed there until dawn. She asked Helga why. Helga typed, "Because his wolf will not settle unless he is near you. He has not slept through the night since his wolf awakened at 14. His beast is too strong, too volatile. Every alpha king in the Voss line has carried this burden. The wolf destroys the man eventually. His father died at 43, shredded from the inside by a beast he could no longer control. Kyle is 31. Elara read the message twice. Thought about the cabin, the splintered floor, the black eyes, the way his body had caught between forms, neither man nor beast, trapped in the violence of the transition, and the way her vibration, her counter-frequency had settled him back. She got up, walked to her door, opened it. He was there, sitting on the floor with his back against the opposite wall, legs extended, head tilted back, eyes closed. He was not asleep. She could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands rested on his thighs, with fingers slightly curled, as if he was holding himself in place through will alone. He was wearing a grey t-shirt and sweatpants, and no shoes, and his feet were bare on the cold wood floor, and he looked nothing like a king, and everything like a man who was very tired of fighting something inside himself. She sat down next to him, on the floor, in the hallway, at 2 a.m. His eyes opened, gold, not black. He looked at her, and something in his face shifted the same crack in granite she had seen when she told him his howl sounded like construction equipment. His lips moved. "You should be sleeping." She pulled out the small notepad and pen she had started carrying, wrote in neat, careful handwriting, "So should you." He read it, almost smiled. Almost. The crack widened a fraction. She wrote, "Helga told me about your wolf, about your father." The almost smile vanished. His jaw set. He looked away toward the darkened hallway, and she watched the muscles in his neck work as he swallowed something that was not saliva. When he looked back, his lips moved slowly. "My father lost control on a Tuesday afternoon. He was eating lunch with my mother." He shifted at the table. She survived because her wolf was fast. He did not come back. The beast ran for 3 days. They found his body at the base of a cliff. The fall had not killed him. He had shifted back at the last moment. He chose to be human when he died. Elara listened with her eyes. She read every word on his lips, and she watched the way his throat moved, and she saw the boy behind the king, the 14-year-old, who had watched his father be consumed by the same beast that lived in his own chest. She reached over, took his hand, pressed his palm flat against the floor. Then she pressed her own palm down next to his. She pushed the vibration outward, slowly this time, not in the desperate rush of the cabin. A steady, low-frequency pulse that traveled through the floorboards, through his hand, up his arm. She watched his face as it reached him, watched his shoulders drop, watched his jaw unclench, watched his eyes close, not in tension, but in something that looked impossibly like relief. They sat like that for an hour, side by side on the hallway floor, palms down, connected through the vibrations in the wood. She did not know what she was doing. She only knew that it worked. At some point, his head tilted sideways and came to rest against the top of hers, and the weight of it, the warmth of it, the way his hair smelled of pine soap and something underneath that was purely him, made the cage in her chest rattle. She fell asleep in the hallway. When she woke, she was in her bed, tucked under the covers, and there was a glass of water on the nightstand and a note in handwriting she had never seen before. "You are the first thing that has ever quieted him. I will not let you go. I am sorry if that frightens you. It is the truth." She folded the note and put it under her pillow and pressed her face into the clean cotton and breathed and didn't cry and didn't smile and felt the cage crack a little wider. 2 weeks at Blackmore, and the pendant grew warmer every day. She could feel it against her throat now, a constant low heat that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, as if something inside the silver was synchronizing with something inside her. She caught herself touching it, without thinking, her fingers finding the crescent moon, the way a tongue finds a loose tooth, compulsively repetitively, the way the body worries at things that are about to change. Kyle noticed. He noticed everything about her she was learning. The way she favored her right hand because a childhood break in her left wrist had healed slightly crooked. The way she stood near windows because she navigated by light, the way hearing people navigate by sound. The way she flinched involuntarily when someone appeared behind her, because in a world without sound, everything that arrived unannounced was a potential threat. He adapted. He never approached her from behind. He made sure to enter her line of sight before speaking. He learned a dozen signs, not formal sign language, but a private vocabulary they built between them, gestures that meant, eat and sleep and come here, and are you all right? And he typed on his phone with increasing fluency, their conversations becoming longer, more complex, more layered with the intimacy of two people who were building a language from scratch because the usual one didn't work. One night, sitting in the library, a room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a fireplace that threw dancing shadows across the leather chairs, he typed, "I need to tell you something about the binding seal." She read the screen, waited. He typed, "I had the pack historian research it. The seal on your pendant is not standard magic. It is a bloodline seal. It was placed by someone of Alpha Royal blood, your mother's blood or your father's. It was designed to suppress not just your wolf, but your entire lineage signature. Whoever sealed you did not want anyone to know what you are." Ilara touched the pendant. "What am I?" He took the phone, typed for a long time, showed her the screen. The crescent moon is the sigil of the Ashenvale line. They were the original Alpha bloodline, the first wolves. They were destroyed in the Purge Wars 200 years ago. Every history says the line is extinct, but the pendant you wear bears their seal, and the frequency you generate, the one that calms my wolf, is documented in the old texts as the Ashenvale resonance. Only wolves of that bloodline could produce it. It was said to be the only force that could balance the Voss beast. She read it 3 times, the letters blurred on the 4th because her eyes were wet. She typed, "My mother." She was Ashenvale. He typed, "I believe so. I believe someone knew what you were and sealed your wolf to hide you, to protect you from anyone who might want to use the last Ashenvale wolf or destroy her." She sat in the library with the firelight moving across her face and the pendant burning softly against her throat, and thought about her mother who had died bringing her into the world and had left behind nothing except a necklace that was actually a cage meant to save her life. And she thought about the cage in her chest, the one that had been cracking open since the moment she felt Kale's howl through the stone floor of the Silver Ridge kitchen, and she understood that the 2 cages were the same. The pendant was the lock. The wolf inside her was the prisoner, and the prisoner was not an ordinary wolf. "I want to take it off," she typed. Kyle's face was careful, not hesitant, careful the way a man is careful when he is holding something explosive and someone has asked him to pull the pin. He typed, "When you do, the wolf will emerge." She has been compressed for 22 years. The release will be intense. "I need the healers present. I need the compound cleared. And I need to be in my wolf form so that if your wolf is disoriented, mine can anchor her." She looked at him, at the golden eyes and the scarred forearms, and the hands that had made her scrambled eggs, and pulled her hand away from her mouth and sat outside her door, every night, for 2 weeks. She typed, "Are you afraid of what I might be?" He typed, "I am afraid of nothing, except losing you before I have had the chance to deserve you." She did not kiss him then. She wanted to. The pull was so strong, it was almost gravitational, a tide in her blood that drew her toward him, the way his howl had drawn her through the stones. But something held her back, and she recognized it as the last remnant of the girl who had been told she was worthless, who had been fed cold rice and clothed in lie-stained shirts, who had lived her entire life being invisible and had started to believe that invisibility was all she was. That girl was not gone. That girl was standing between Elara and the man who called her his mate, and she was saying, "You do not deserve this. You do not deserve warmth or eggs or clean sheets or a king who sits outside your door. You are a deaf omega, with no wolf and no voice, and no value." Elara closed her eyes, felt the pendant burn, and told that girl gently to sit down. The removal was planned for a Tuesday. Kyle chose the location, a natural clearing in the forest above the compound, ringed by ancient pines whose roots went deep into the mountain bedrock. The healers set up a medical station at the tree line. The warriors formed a perimeter. The compound was evacuated to the lower valley. Every wolf and pup and elder moved to safe houses, because no one knew what would happen when a sealed Ashenvale wolf was released after 2 decades of containment. Elara stood in the center of the clearing, in clothes Helga had chosen. Simple, loose, easy to tear if shifting required it. Her feet were bare on the ground, and she could feel the mountain beneath her, the vast, slow vibration of stone and water and root systems that had been growing for centuries. The earth hummed. Kyle stood 10 feet away, already shirtless, already half-shifted, his eyes flickering between gold and black, as his wolf pressed forward in anticipation. He had told her through his phone that his wolf had been restless for days, pacing the inside of his skull, whining in a register that even he could barely hear. His wolf knew what was coming. His wolf had been waiting for this since the moment it had first caught her scent across the Silver Ridge Great Hall. He nodded. She reached up, took the pendant between her fingers. The silver was hot now, almost too hot to touch, and the crescent moon burned against her skin as if it was fighting to stay, as if the seal knew it was being broken and was making one last desperate attempt to hold. She pulled. The chain snapped. The pendant fell, and the world split open. The sensation was not painful. It was beyond pain, beyond pleasure, beyond any physical framework she had for understanding what her body was doing. It was as if every cell in her body had been asleep for 22 years and was waking up simultaneously, a full-body defibrillation that started in her chest and radiated outward in a wave that she could feel, actually feel, rippling through her muscles, her bones, her skin. Her wolf rose. Not slowly, not gently, not in the gradual controlled emergence that most wolves experienced at their first shift. Her wolf rose like a geyser, like a volcano, like something that had been compressed to a point of singularity, and was now expanding to fill the space it had always been meant to occupy. The clearing shook, the pine trees swayed, the healers at the tree line stumbled backward, and Elara shifted. The transformation was instantaneous. One moment she was standing, the next she was not. Her body folded and rebuilt itself in a single blinding second bones, reshaping muscles, reforming skin, giving way to fur that was not grey, not brown, not black, not any color that wolves were supposed to be. White. Pure luminous white, the color of moonlight on fresh snow, the color of the crescent moon on the pendant, that now lay in the dirt at her paws. She was large, not alpha large, but something else, something that had its own category, a wolf that stood nearly 4 feet at the shoulder, with silver eyes that caught the morning light and threw it back in prismatic fragments. And she could hear. The world crashed into her like a wave. Birdsong, wind in the pines, the creak of branches, the distant rush of the river in the valley below, the breathing of the healers at the tree line, fast and shallow with awe, the heartbeat of the mountain itself, the deep geological pulse she had felt through floors and foundations her entire life, now audible, now real, now a sound instead of just a vibration. She threw back her head and howled. The sound came from a throat that had never made one before, and it was not a normal howl. It was the Ashenvale resonance, the frequency that could calm the Voss beast, amplified by 22 years of compression and released into the open air of the Blackmore mountains. And it shook the trees and scattered the birds and dropped every wolf within a mile to their knees. Kyle shifted. His wolf was massive, black as coal smoke, with golden eyes that blazed in the morning light. He was the largest wolf she had ever seen. And his beast, the one that had destroyed cabins and nearly destroyed his father and would eventually destroy him, surged forward with a roar that she heard, actually heard the first roar she had ever heard in her life. But it did not attack. It did not rage. It ran to her, crossed the clearing in 3 bounds, and pressed its massive black head against her white shoulder, and the contact sent the resonance through both of them, her frequency and his frequency, locking together like 2 halves of a key, and the Voss beast, for the first time in the recorded history of the bloodline, went still. Completely still. Not suppressed, not fought down, not chained. Still. At peace. The black wolf stood beside the white wolf in the clearing at the top of the world, and his golden eyes were clear and calm and present, in a way that the healers would later say they had never seen in any Voss Alpha, and Ilara, the deaf Omega, who had washed dishes in a basement kitchen 3 weeks ago, stood in her wolf form on the mountain, and heard the world for the first time, and knew that she was not worthless. She had never been worthless. She had been hidden. And now she was found. They did not mark that day. Kyle insisted on waiting, and the reason he gave typed on his phone after they had both shifted back, and she was wrapped in a blanket and shaking with the aftershock of 22 years of compressed power released in a single moment, was this: I will not mark you until you choose it. Not because the bond tells you to. Not because my wolf demands it. Because you, Ilara, the woman, choose me. I have waited 31 years. I can wait longer. She held the phone and read the words and felt the weight of them, the specific gravity of a man who was used to taking whatever he wanted and was choosing for her to ask. 3 days later, Silver Ridge came for her. They arrived at dawn. Not Aldrich himself, he did not have the courage for that. He sent his Beta Gregor with 20 warriors and a document bearing the official seal of the Silver Ridge Council, and they stood at the gates of the Blackmore compound and demanded the return of their Omega. Ilara was in the kitchen when the floor vibrations changed. She had taken to spending mornings there, not washing dishes, but cooking, actually cooking the skill she had taught herself in years of kitchen servitude, now directed at making breakfast for herself and Helga and whoever else wandered in. This morning, she was making omelettes because Helga had taught her how, and because the act of cracking eggs into a bowl and whisking them with a fork and pouring them into a hot pan was a kind of meditation that made the world feel manageable. The vibration hit her feet, heavy, multiple, hostile. She set down the whisk, wiped her hands, walked to the window. Gregor was standing at the compound gate. She recognized his uneven gait, the way he favored his left leg. He was holding the document above his head, and his mouth was moving, and even from this distance, she could read his lips well enough to catch the words that mattered. Property of Silver Ridge. Stolen Omega. Return immediately or face territorial war. Kyle was already at the gate. He had materialized there the way he materialized everywhere, as if the compound bent space to deliver him wherever he was needed. His warriors flanked him. His wolf was visible behind his eyes, the gold brightening, the pupils narrowing to vertical slits. Elara walked out of the kitchen across the courtyard, past the laundry lines where Helga's sheets flapped in the morning wind. She walked to the gate because this was her fight, and she knew it had known it since the moment she read the word property on Gregor's lips. She stood beside Kale. He looked at her. She looked at him. And then she looked at Gregor. Gregor's face, when he saw her, went through several changes. First confusion, because the woman standing in front of him bore little resemblance to the skeletal, bruised, lye-scented Omega he had last seen in the Silver Ridge kitchen. 3 weeks of food and sleep and warmth had filled out her face, darkened the shadows under her eyes to faint smudges, and put color in her cheeks that had not been there since childhood. Her hair was clean and brushed and caught the morning sun, and her eyes, those pale silver-grey eyes that had always made people uncomfortable, were looking at him without fear. Then recognition. Then something else. Something that looked briefly like regret. She had not expected that. Gregor had never been the worst of them. He had not been kind, but he had not been cruel the way Maren was cruel, or indifferent the way Aldrich was indifferent. He had simply been a man who followed orders and did not ask questions about the Omega, who slept in the basement and ate cold rice and washed dishes until her knuckles bled. He had not hated her. He had not seen her. And looking at him now, reading the momentary flicker across his face before he schooled it back to beta blankness, she wondered if the not seeing had cost him something too. He held out the document. His lips moved. She read them. Alpha Aldrich demands the return of Omega designation 743 Ilara, no surname, classified as non-shifting domestic utility, per territorial law section. Kyle took the document, read it, and then he did something that Gregor clearly had not anticipated. He laughed. It was not a pleasant laugh. It was the sound, and she could hear it now. She could hear everything now of a wolf who had been handed the punchline to a joke that was not funny. He folded the document in half, then in quarters. Then he tore it once, twice, 3 times, and let the pieces fall at Gregor's feet like confetti. His voice, the first voice she had ever heard clearly, was deep and rough, and carried the particular resonance of an alpha command, the kind that vibrated in the chest cavity, and made lesser wolves bare their throats involuntarily. "Go back to your alpha," he said. And she heard every word, every syllable, the first complete sentence she had ever received through her ears instead of her eyes, and the sound of his voice was pine and iron and storm. "Tell Aldrich that his Omega designation, 743, is the last living descendant of the Ashenvale bloodline. Tell him she is my mate, my future queen, and the only wolf alive who can balance the Voss beast. Tell him that if he sends anyone to this gate again, I will come to Silver Ridge personally, and I will not come to talk." Gregor stood very still. The document fragments fluttered around his boots. His warriors shifted uncomfortably behind him, their wolves sensing the alpha command in Cale's voice and responding despite belonging to a different pack. Gregor's jaw worked. His Adam's apple bobbed. And then he did something that surprised Elara more than anything that had happened in the last 3 weeks. He looked at her. Directly at her. Not past her, not through her, not at the space she occupied, as if it were empty. At her, and his lips moved slowly, carefully, the way Helga spoke when she wanted Elara to read every word. "I am sorry." Then he turned, walked back to his convoy, drove away. Kyle watched until the vehicles were out of sight. Then he turned to Elara, and his face was still hard, still the face of a king who had just threatened war, but his eyes were soft, and his hand found hers, and his thumb traced a circle on her palm. "You heard me?" he said. "You heard my voice." She nodded. Her throat was tight. She shaped the words the way she had always shaped them, with the flat underwater quality that was all she had ever known. But now she could hear herself too, and the sound of her own voice was strange and small and imperfect, and hers. "I heard you," she said. His hand tightened on hers, his jaw flexed, and he pulled her against him, not gently, not carefully, with the full, desperate force of a man who had been restraining himself for 3 weeks and had reached the exact limit of his capacity for restraint. His arms locked around her back, his face pressed into her hair, and he breathed her in with a shudder that she felt through his entire body, and she pressed her palms flat against his chest and felt his heartbeat and his wolf's heartbeat, both of them, man and beast, steady and synchronized for the first time in his life. "I want to be marked," she said, against his collarbone. "I am choosing you, not the bond, not the wolf. Me." He pulled back, looked at her face, searched it with those golden eyes for any sign of doubt or obligation, or the old compliance that had governed her life at Silver Ridge. He found none. His lips moved, and she heard him speak, and read his lips simultaneously, the words arriving in stereo, in 2 channels at once, sight and sound converging on the same meaning. "Tonight," he said, "in front of the pack, so everyone knows. So no one ever questions who you belong to and who I belong to." She kissed him then. The first kiss. It was not graceful. Her nose bumped his chin because she had never done this before and had no frame of reference for the geometry of 2 faces meeting. His hand came up to cup her jaw, adjusting the angle, and the second attempt was better. His mouth warm and firm against hers, tasting of black coffee and pine, and the resonance that lived in both of them hummed through the contact point. A vibration that was not sound and not silence, but something in between, a frequency that belonged only to them. The marking ceremony took place at sundown in the same clearing where she had first shifted. The entire pack assembled. Warriors, elders, omegas, children perched on parents' shoulders, Helga standing at the front with her arms crossed, and her chin lifted, and her eyes bright with something she would later deny was tears. Elara wore white. Not a gown, not a formal dress, but a simple linen shift that Helga had made by hand over the last week, sewing it in the evenings by lamplight, while Elara ate stew and pretended not to notice. The linen was soft against her skin. Her feet were bare on the grass. The pendant, the broken binding seal, hung from a new chain around her neck, not as a cage, but as a memory. She would never forget what she had been. She would never allow anyone to forget what had been done. Kyle stood before her in black. His wolf was visible in the shift of his features, the elongation of his canines, the gold of his eyes gone molten. He had never looked more dangerous or more gentle. The contradiction was the whole of him, the king who could level a compound and the man who made scrambled eggs, and she loved both. The ceremony was ancient. Kyle spoke the words, and she heard them each one resonating through the clearing like stones dropped into still water. He spoke of bonds and blood and the promise of protection, and his voice didn't waver and his hands didn't shake. And when he reached the part where tradition called for the alpha to claim his mate, to mark her as his, before the eyes of the pack, he paused. He looked at her, tilted his head slightly. His lips moved in words meant only for her, too quiet for the pack to hear, but loud enough for her new miraculous ears. Last chance to run. She said, I have been running from nothing my entire life. I am done running. He bit her. Not the savage territorial bite that the old texts described. Not the violent claiming of wolf over wolf. His mouth found the curve of her neck where it met her shoulder, and his teeth broke the skin with a precision that was almost surgical, and the pain was brief and bright, and immediately replaced by something else. Warmth, a flooding, rushing warmth that started at the mark and travelled outward through her body like liquid light, and the mate bond which had been a pull, a tug, a suggestion solidified into something permanent. She could feel him, not just his physical presence, his emotions, his wolf, the constant thrumming heartbeat of the Voss beast, calm now. Calm in a way it had never been calm before, settled into the cradle of the Ashenvale resonance that would hold it for the rest of their lives. She marked him back. This was not traditional. The Omega did not typically mark the Alpha. But Elara had never been traditional, and Kyle had offered her his throat with a submission that made the watching pack draw a collective breath, and she set her teeth against the muscle of his neck and bit down, and her wolf, the luminous white wolf that had been sealed for 22 years, rose inside her and poured through the bite, and the mark she left was not just physical, it was resonant. The pack felt it. A wave of calm, of settling of peace that rolled outward from the two of them in the center of the clearing and washed over every wolf present. She heard with her new ears the soft sighs, the rustling of bodies relaxing, a child's laugh, and from somewhere near the back, Helga's voice, clear and firm and carrying the authority of a woman who had outlived 2 kings. About time. The pack howled. The sound hit Elara like a wall. 50 wolves raising their voices to the darkening sky, a chorus of welcome and celebration and recognition. And she had never heard a howl before, had only ever felt them through stone and wood and earth, and the reality of the sound was so much more than the vibration that she pressed her hand to her chest and felt her heart pound and let the sound wash through her. Kyle's arm was around her waist. His mark throbbed on her neck, warm and permanent, and hers throbbed on his. He leaned down and pressed his lips to her ear, and his breath was warm, and his voice was low, and the words he said were not a declaration of love or a possessive claim, or any of the things she might have expected from the Alpha King who had found his mate. He said, "What do you want for breakfast tomorrow?" And she laughed. She laughed with sound, with her voice, the flat, underwater, imperfect voice that was hers, and the sound of it carried across the clearing and mixed with the howling, and she did not cover her mouth. "Scrambled eggs," she said, "with cheese." He pulled her closer. The pine trees swayed. The mountain hummed beneath their bare feet, the old, deep vibration of stone and root and earth, and somewhere in the valley below, in a compound of dark wood and river stone, a kettle was already heating on the stove, and Helga was already cracking eggs into a bowl, and the sound of it, the small, specific domestic sound of a shell breaking and yielding what was inside, travelled up through the mountain in a frequency that only the two of them could feel.